Hi, I'm Ryan Davis.
And I'm Kiernan Schmidt.
And this is Out of Office, a travel podcast.
The seat taken.
Hey, Kiernan.
Ryan, it's the most wonderful time of the year.
We have done enough Christmas specials. I think we did like 4 specials in a row.
No,
folks are ready for some meat and potatoes.
This is the beauty of this time of year because, you know, you get Thanksgiving. That's great. The lead up to Christmas, fantastic. You have a fun time on New Year's Eve. And then you're hit in the January doldrums. But I always know that one day, there's not a consistent day that they reveal it. They don't reveal it on New Year's Day. It's always like within like the next 2 weeks after in January. The New York Times travel section puts out their 52 places list for the year. And that's the most wonderful time of the year.
Yeah, that is like travel Christmas.
Exactly. It's travel Christmas. So Merry Travel Christmas to you.
Thank you. Merry Travel Christmas to you.
And, in keeping up what has become a tradition on the podcast, today we're having the editor of the New York Times travel section, Amy Virshup, join us for a chat on the 2022 list, which is quite different than previous lists that they've had.
Yeah, and this is Amy's, I think it's her 3rd time, right? On
That's right.
the pod?
It's her 3rd time on the show. I think she's our only 3-time guest.
Connor
Slack and Connor Knighton over at CBS Sunday Morning. Super interesting chat about the challenges of again putting together a list in COVID times. Amy openly said it wasn't exactly what she expected to be doing as the travel editor of the New York Times. And it's interesting to hear all the considerations that went into the list. And then you and I on our last stop are each going to choose one of our favorite features from the 52 places list, because that's really what the list is all about, is discovering exciting new places and hearing stories of destinations you may be unfamiliar with.
Yeah, and there's a lot of really interesting picks on this list this year.
Oh, it's fantastic. And I also thought in previous interviews, I've talked with Amy about how they make the decisions on the layout of the webpage and how they present the stories. And this year, just a great focus on big, rich visuals. And man, they just, I start to travel salivate looking at them.
Yeah, I mean, there is a lot to dig into here, all around the globe. Some surprises, some places you would think would have been on the list many times. So it's I really enjoyed flipping through it, and it's gorgeous. I recommend folks look at it on their laptop or their desktop just because the images are so beautiful. We're linked to it in the show notes.
I think my favorite graphic wise is the Australia post, where you just get a parade of tiny penguins traversing a beach.
Yeah, I mean, that goes with our last episode. They called that wildlife.
Absolutely. Now, Ryan, but before we jump into the interview, though, I wanted to share with you something that I've recently learned about from an Instagram account that I follow. It's a guy. His name is Ranger Josh, and that's his alias on Instagram. Alias, is that what you call it?
Yeah, alias works.
Yeah, Ranger Josh, and Ranger Josh is a bleeding heart liberal, which is, so he has lots of good political content, but he's also a national park ranger who has worked in several different park properties, and he's often bringing interesting insights into what it's like to be a national park ranger, and that's the content I really love.
That's a dream.
And he posted something the other day that was counterintuitive, and it was a surprise to me. We just had that episode about traveling to go see wildlife, and one of our biggest takeaways was about keeping distance and being respectful of park rules. And he talked about a park rule that I have to admit, I had never even thought about. So do you know what a cairn is in a park? CAIRN, a cairn?
No, because I thought you said like a Karen, and that would have been, like a really annoying white woman asking for the manager of the park. But that's not what you mean.
Excuse me. Case. There's a bison in the road, and I cannot get through.
There are some bugs What can we do about this?
So a cairn, and of course, my parents obviously were very inspired by cairns and came up with my name off of them. A cairn is when you see a stack of rocks. So you know, tourists love to do this in outdoor places. You find 6-10 rocks and you stack them from the largest to the smallest, and you make like a tower out of them. That's vaguely familiar to you, right?
Sure. Yeah. No, I've done that on hikes and stuff. Yeah.
And you see him on trails all the time. And Ranger Josh posted this thing that said, don't make rock cairns in national parks. And I have to be honest, I've always thought of it as like a nice alternative to people who, you know, get a knife and like stab their initials into a tree or something, which drives me absolutely crazy.
Or pocket some of those petrified rocks.
Oh, well, Ryan, we don't need to talk about your criminal history. And so I was Googling around to figure out, you know, why can't people build cairns? But as it turns out, this is something that the national parks don't want you to do, because even though it may not seem like it disturbs the natural setting, it can actually have an erosive effect for the soil. So they don't want you to be yanking out rocks just to build these cairns so you can leave your mark on a trail.
I mean, that does make sense, right? It always felt a little bit like something you shouldn't do, but it seems harmless enough if you don't like really think about it.
Well, it's one of these things where different parks have different rules about it. And the truth is, there are cairns that are used in the national parks to demarcate trails. So just as some trails will have blazes, they actually have national park rangers who one of their tasks is to go out and to keep up particular cairns where a trail may be harder to decipher. And so if you or I are out on the trail and we're building our own, it actually messes with those important directional ones. And as I say, it can have an effect on the natural setting. So, you know, if you have the desire to build a cairn, you know, do it back in your lodge room, but don't do it out on the trail. And certainly don't mess with the official ones, because they've got to stay standing for other hikers.
Can you imagine how weird it would be to walk into a room as like a cleaning person and just see all these cairns stacked up everywhere? That'd be creepy, right? You'd be like, who is this creep who's in my room?
You take all the coasters in the room and you build a cairn to guide yourself to the bathroom. I love it. And of course, you know, this is one of these things that I love about the internet and about these rabbit holes that you can get down. As it turns out, there's actually a specific type of cairn that is made just for Acadia National Park. And it was designed by somebody named Waldron Bates, who in the late 1800s and early 1900s was called him a trailblazer. He was literally a trailblazer within the Acadia National Park before it was a well-established place. And many of the trails exist to this day. Also Harvard man, by the way, just want to note that. And his name was Waldron Bates, and he came up with a design for what is called a Bates cairn. And it's basically 2 pillars of 2 to 3 rocks in each pillar on top of each other. But then he adds a crossbar. You know, these Harvard men, always innovating. He adds a crossbar, so it almost looks like an altar. And then on top of the altar, you have a rock that points the direction that you're meant to go in. I mean, I don't know why we're not all building Bates cairns all the time.
Yeah, it seems like a cairn could really, they could use them out on the highways. Instead of exit markers, you could just have sort of an elaborate cairn. That, that must be exit 47.
Again, I want to say it's not cairn, it's cairn.
Cairn. Well, this makes sense because apparently cairns are a Scottish tradition that signifies respect.
Also, your comment about it and mispronunciation makes me think maybe the national parks, if they don't want you to be upsetting the soil, maybe they should introduce cairns on the trail that go, I think you're going in the wrong direction. You should be going that way. Just women who stand at these intersections and tell you which way to go.
Less stackable, though.
Well, it's gone in a weird direction. And
I do like a stack of cairns would scare people off, though.
This is the conversation when we have the New York Times travel section editor on the podcast.
Sorry, Amy.
I mean, my God. Well, Ryan, with this great dive into cairn history, and actually, it is befitting because one of the themes of this year's 52 Places is lots of national parks, lots of protected and conserved lands, and so these are places where cairns might be a concern.
Yeah,
concern.
All right. Well, no more Karens in front of the interview. Let's get right to it.
All right. So with that, let's get to my interview with the travel editor of the New York Times, Amy Virshup. Tell the cabin crew.
Flight attendants, prepare for takeoff, please.
I'm joined today by the editor of the New York Times travel section, Amy Virshup, to talk through the creation of 2022's 52 Places list, a release I look forward to every year. Literally, it's Thanksgiving, Christmas, New Year's, and then I start to get depressed about the new year, and then the list comes, and I immediately feel my passion for travel reignited, Amy. So this is one of my favorite conversations that I do on the pod.
Oh, I'm glad to hear that.
And this year's version of the list is the second published in a travel world that is just turned upside down by COVID. And it's called 52 Places for a Changed World. Let me begin by asking, how did you and your team approach putting together yet another list in the age of COVID when I'm sure you thought last year's was going to be the one and only?
Yeah, being the travel editor during COVID has been an experience. And, there's that old saying of man plans and God laughs. Mm-hmm. I think it's, now it's man plans and the virus laughs. So we're all trying to, find our way through. So for, we started talking about the list as we usually do at around September. And the real question was, was there actually something, could we even do a list this year? Should we do a list this year? And if we were going to do it, what should its shape be? And so I decided with the staff, we had a pretty robust debate about it, like whether we should even do it again or put it on pause. And we decided that we did want to do it because people still, even though maybe we're not traveling to the extent that we used to be, and most people are not, we felt like there was still something valuable about travel and something valuable about the inspiration of the list. But we also felt that we couldn't just go in and do our usual list, which is, here are these places that maybe have a new museum that's opening, or they have a really exciting food scene that's developed. The world is so in flux now, it's really hard to make any judgments about, where it would be good to go and where exciting things are happening, because so much is on hold and so much changes constantly. Mm-hmm. So we had to take the pandemic into effect. And then we also felt very deeply that we had to take things like climate change and over-tourism and the whole issue of sustainability into play as well. And that really, in the time of the pandemic, in these two now going on, we're in our third calendar year, there's been a lot of time to think about travel, to think about what travel means and what its effects are and what kind of its unintended consequences are. And so that we needed to really adjust the way that we were thinking and the way we approached the list to take those into account.
I like the title Changed World because it does capture, sure, it's deeply changed because of COVID, but you and your team really took this expanded view of it's not just because of COVID. The world has fundamentally changed, and that brings both opportunities and an investigation of our responsibility as travelers.
Right. And so, we tried to find places. So once we sort of came up with this approach, and I wrote up a memo for people of what we were looking for. And really it was places that were taking, positive steps forward to the greatest extent possible, that they were driven by the people in a locale, so that it wasn't like, somebody coming in from outside with some kind of savior complex of I'm going to fix this, but really places that were, doing it for themselves, as it were. And, and really trying to sort out and drive solutions, and where people, when they traveled to those places, could be part of that finding of solutions.
Were there places included this year that you think wouldn't be included in some form in lists in more normal times?
Yeah, I mean, although so for example, we did Cleveland because of a place called Edwin's, which is a restaurant where prisoners and people who have been formerly incarcerated on their release from prison come and get education in restaurant, how to run a restaurant and culinary arts, that kind of thing. And they help place people into permanent jobs, permanent housing, really helping ease that transition back into life for people, for prisoners. Cleveland, we might have put on a list at other times as well. There have been developments there over time, but we wouldn't have put on for that reason. Mm-hmm. And I think in most of them you could argue, and some places have been on before, and some we did Puerto Rico a couple of years ago on our list, but we put it back on and did the El Yunque forest this year because there are grassroots efforts to help there where government aid has been very slow in coming to help restore after the hurricanes that hit there.
Well, I can see what you're saying. That I do think something that felt very different and exciting to me about this list was the level of reporting and human or community stories that are being told through the place. So the one that jumps to my mind is for Marrakesh. You're not just calling out Marrakesh as a destination, you're calling it out as a place where women are starting to gain rights, to have better business opportunities, and where as a tourist you can support that.
Right. And so I think in a lot of the places that we talk about, like if you did go to one of these places, and again, as I say, I wrote an introduction to this as well, and we're not necessarily saying jump on a plane and go to Marrakesh now, but if you went there, we were trying to steer you to a more authentic experience of that, and less the okay, there are many glamorous, small hotels in Marrakesh that one could stay in. But here we were trying to tell you how to actually interact with the culture there more, and to benefit the culture there more, and make sure that money that you're spending was staying more in that community.
And I remember in previous years, we've talked about, you look at the list holistically and you try to make sure it's geographically diverse and that there's a mix of urban areas and natural habitats. Did the calculus change in, this year? Were you featuring more nature than you typically would? Were there countries that wouldn't typically have been on the radar, but that you saw kind of rise and seemed like obvious choices?
I do think that, the list skews more rural and wilderness and and parks than it has in previous years. I definitely think that's true. I mean, I think one of the things that we did not include that would typically be in a list is some big cultural events. And one of the reasons we didn't do that is because it's so uncertain as to what is really going to go on. Things get canceled. As we're speaking, the Sundance Film Festival went all virtual this week, right? So if we had, you might suggest a place with a big festival, but we don't know whether it's going to happen or not. So I do, and I think there are fewer big urban centers than there have been in the past. And I also, we do not have a place in China on the list. And that was in part, just because China is so closed down right now that we had a hard time figuring where we would be sending people.
Yeah. Did you think that this year the ask to contributors and reporters was a more difficult ask than in previous 52 places lists because it required, you of course in your department would be getting all the major travel press releases and, being courted by everyone that has a story to tell. It seems to me like this 52 places list is chock full of lesser known stories.
Yeah, I think that's definitely true. And I think we did the ask several times, and I think there were some people who just, there were people we went to who sent us kind of a traditional 52 suggestion, and sometimes we would go back to them and say, no, really think in this new way. And you would kind of think, it's a list. How hard is it to, nominate things? But I think people really did have to think differently and think more, as you said. I do think there are a lot of lesser known places on it that, we wouldn't have done them all on a list the way we did this year, even if one or even if they might have made it onto lists in the past.
One of the problems that it seems like you went head on and was over-tourism. And there's a handful that are clearly alternatives to major tourist destinations. Any of those stand out to you, or did you find yourself flooded with those? Do you think that's a sustainable way for us to approach the problem of over-tourism?
Well, I think it's one of the answers. I love the place that we put first on the list, and the list isn't really like numbered 1 to 52 in terms of this is our favorite place and number 52 is our last place. It's just that if you have a list of 52 places, you have to start with 1 and go to the end. I think that alternative destinations are part of an answer. I don't think they're an answer in and of themselves because, like Chioggia, it looks amazing and beautiful, and I think would be a great trip. And I personally would like to go there, but I'm not sure that a person going to that part of the world is going to skip Venice entirely and go to Chioggia, so that maybe they spend a day in Chioggia as well. So how do you then deal with the fact that, the places that are over-touristed often are over-touristed for reasons of, their unique beauty and interest, and how do you deal with that? And how do you maintain their beauty and interest, when they get so heavily touristed? I was actually in Venice in October, and, people were telling me it was like 60% of the people who were usually there, and it was still pretty darn crowded.
Yeah, I know one of the ones that certainly I'm adding to my list based on this year's 52 places is Gouda, Netherlands. I have to say I had not it had never occurred to me to go there, but I love it as an alternative.
Yeah, and that picture I was so overwhelmed. But that's one of my favorite photographs in the whole thing. It just has such a beautiful, beautiful quality to it. That and the Inner Hebrides. I'm not a big Scotch drinker, but that photograph is like a constable or something, and it really made me want to go there.
And then another interesting story is that in Spain of Islas Cíes, where they have a strict number of visitors that are allowed in, 1,800 in the high season. And it's, if you make the cutoff, you make it. And if you don't, you don't. And I know I had spoken to somebody from the national parks, and as somebody who recently spent an hour and a half in Acadia National Park just circling the parking lot trying to find a space, I know that, this is very likely the sort of system, this permitting system that's going to be introduced to some in the U.S. to some of the more popular U.S. national parks.
Yeah. We did have a suggestion. You should have gone to our main suggestion to help relieve. Cobscook Shores. Yes.
Which is a new protected area.
Yep, exactly. So you could have gone there and avoided some of the crowds at Acadia. I mean, but Acadia is a great place too. So it's really trying to figure out. I think there has to be a whole suite of answers to the issue of overcrowding and overtourism. And, it may be limits. It may be, I would hate to see dynamic pricing to go into the national parks, right? Like that would just be really, really wrong. Mm-hmm. But I think we have to think about what the solutions might be. Or maybe you don't get to drive into Acadia. Maybe you have to leave your car somewhere else. And we have more robust public transit to get people into the park.
Now, it does seem like climate change was a major part of the brief this year. And you focus, as you say, on a lot of natural areas. I think the scales tipped slightly more towards the national parks or new protected lands. Were there any stories that kind of jumped out at you as these are truly novel solutions that are being tried out at a local scale and climate change that may surprise readers?
Well, I mentioned the Inner Hebrides and how beautiful our photograph is, but I also liked there that they are going to try using turbines under the ocean to try and power the distilleries. Because I love that idea. You have this very old ancient tradition of making scotch, and then you have this newfangled way of perhaps powering it. I thought that was quite cool.
I also thought, and this is something that my co-host Ryan and I think a lot about, which is what is the positive side of tourism? Tourism as an essential part of economies or as part of the solutions of preserving natural wonders or pieces of culture. And I did think that there were quite a good handful of stories in here that might surprise people to really think about, folks who love to travel have been so focused on their inability to travel or their limited ability to travel during COVID. And the story in Kyoto really stuck out to me, which is that there is a traditional type of architecture that is now being threatened with development. And it's largely because Kyoto has lost its tourism industry in the short term.
Yeah, no, that's definitely true. And that's another place I would love to go. And, I do think one of the things we did try to highlight here is the extent to which your tourism dollars can, if you direct them correctly, can really help support communities. And, to the extent that local community, you can make sure that when you travel, rather than going with a company that may take money out, not put the money into the place that they are operating. Our emphasis was really on okay, how do we get the money into the hands of the local community and make sure that your travel is benefiting the people who are there?
I'm curious, how do you make the decision when to include or spotlight a full country as opposed to a specific location in that country? And I'm thinking of it in terms of this tourism as a solution in Sierra Leone, because that's a country that had never really occurred to me to plan a trip to. But you really tell a rich history of what the country's been through, but what it can offer to travelers. So how do you deal with that instead of just saying this part of Sierra Leone?
Well, I think sometimes it's that there may not be one particular destination within a country that you would make that big a trip to, but that a country in general might have a number of things that you could do. And so that was really the case in Sierra Leone, that there were, various ways that you could travel there and see what was on offer, and make it worth your while to go there.
There was one feature on the list that it just, I've deeply charmed by it. I had never heard anything about this place. And it was in the context of trying to create tourist destinations and revive and bring life to areas, Humboldt, Kansas.
Yes.
So I'm wondering if you can share that story.
Humboldt is a place where we really wanted to make sure that we were not neglecting the Middle America. And so Humboldt is a place where some people who actually originally are from Kansas have undertaken this community effort to revitalize a town. It seemed like they are succeeding, and it seems like something worth our supporting. And as a kind of an incubator for this idea, we also thought it was valuable to do that. You could go to a small town and with community buy-in, because that's part of it. It's not like these people from outside came in and said, we're going to change your town for you. It's more people who were originally from Kansas, who wanted to be back in Kansas and who wanted to support having, revitalizing a community, got together in that community and with people there and really have made this effort. And that was what was so, interesting to us for it. And, going back to are there places that probably wouldn't have been on the list before? I guess I will give you Humboldt, Kansas as one that probably wouldn't have been.
Well, I appreciate that and Cleveland as examples on the list, at least for American readers, that these are places that, despite international difficulties with traveling for COVID, these are places that you could reach, particularly as I'm looking forward to these spring and summer months where we may feel safer. Omicron may have declined. These are interesting places we could plan trips to and realistically get to.
Right. And we always try to have, the list every year always tries to have some mix of U.S. destinations in it as well, because we do think it's important for people to travel within the United States. We have Saguaro National Park, which is an amazing place to go. We have the Santa Cruz County, California. So there are a number of places on there that are American destinations. We have San Francisco as well, and the Great Highway, which really looks like so much fun to me. I would like to go out there and ride my bike out there.
And just looking beyond the 52 places list, you opened by talking about the unexpected challenges that once you took over the reins of the travel section, a worldwide pandemic was not exactly in the cards, I'm sure, during the interview process. And so what do you have coming up this year? Anything that you'd like to tease that folks can look forward to, new projects that you're looking to, or anything that maybe you're mothballing?
No, I mean, one of the things that, so much of it is driven by what's going on with the virus. We've had our 36 hours column has been on hold since March of 2020. And I would like to, if the virus will, give us a chance, I would like to bring that back and maybe come up with some exciting new approaches to that. So that's definitely on our plate for the coming year. And then, just trying to figure out how best to help people travel, because, I think the traditional destination story, we would love to get back to writing, but I think we're not quite there yet. And every destination story that we do, I think we still have to factor in, okay, how do you do this during a pandemic, and how do you stay safe while you're traveling?
The Times travel section is such a source of inspiration and exciting reportage for those of us who are not able to get out as much as we'd like to. And I've been really impressed with the creativity of you and your staff on how you're approaching stories or what narratives you're bringing in. And I thought this 52 places list really highlights so many exciting human stories. And it really left me with hope in a way that, previous 52 places list didn't have this darker context around it. And so thank you for making me hopeful that things will be better. There are people doing amazing things and places that we can all get out to.
Oh, that's great to hear. I really appreciate it. And I do, giving people hope is a wonderful thing. And I'm glad we were able to do it.
And now it's time for the last stop.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is the last stop on this train. Everyone, please leave the train.
All right, Ryan, we're here in the last stop. Reintroducing Ryan, turning on your mic. Ryan, I couldn't let you speak to the New York Times travel editor. You just don't have the polish.
No, we'd let you handle these important interviews.
Absolutely. You can just get all the natural wine entrepreneurs you can trick onto being on the podcast. I'll handle the big names.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
So pretty interesting dive into the thought process behind the 52 places. You know, I really stand by something that I shared with Amy, which is the level of journalism in this year's list really stands out to me. Lots of lesser known stories. So in previous years where it's been, you know, a new museum is opening or like, you know, a new festival is happening. In this year where it's much more focused on changing worlds, on ecological change, on grassroots activism, on the responsibilities and the opportunities of the travel industry. I mean, these really, it felt like any one of these 52 could have been a standalone article in the travel section.
Yeah, absolutely. There's some really interesting stories here and a lot to dig into.
Well, again, thanks very much to Amy. But, and you know, here we are in the last step, and we're going to keep the theme of the 52 places going because, of course, this is the final segment of the show, the last segment of the show. And it's why it's called The Last Stop. And it's your favorite segment. It's my favorite segment. It's popularly known as the People segment. And this is where you and I each bring, usually it's something unpredictable, and that's part of the surprise that makes it such an appealing segment to close on. But we always share something that inspires the spirit of wanderlust within us, even during the workaday week. And the 52 places list is one of these landmark publications every year that anytime my wanderlust is waning, I just go back to this year's or previous years, and man, it just sparks me right up. It's like Wanderlust Viagra, the 52 places.
Yeah, no, it's like anytime you think that you've been everywhere, when you realize you haven't been anywhere yet.
Exactly right. And so, Ryan, I suggested for this special last stop that you and I each choose one place that we found particularly inspiring on this year's list.
Yeah, and so, you know, I was debating picking Queens because, you know, It would be easy for me to take that 10-minute walk up to Ridgewood and sort of experience Queens firsthand. But in light of the conversation we had around our travel resolutions this year, I think a Bureau Park in Argentina, this 2 million acre national park in Argentina, wasn't even on my radar prior to this 52 places. This is now top of my list, and when I make my trip to Argentina this year, I'm going to make sure that I make the trip here to this national park.
Absolutely. And, you know, this is, I have to admit, I feel that I am well versed in national parks in the United States, but certainly don't hear much about parks that are being founded and designed today. And I do try when I'm planning a trip to a place to at least put in a Google to see what national parks exist in other countries, because they're just not, I feel like they're just not covered all that much. But this year's list has a ton of those.
Yeah, there's a ton all over the world, different places to explore. And, you know, I'm a lot like Rick Steves in that when I go to Europe, I'm in the cities, but maybe this is the year that me and Rick, we're going to get out and we're going to explore more. When, you know, get out of the cities and really explore, you know, some of these international national parks. Really interesting stuff.
I would like to request that you never compare yourself to the great man Rick Steves again. But
well, he hasn't done Argentina. I'm beating Rick Steves to Argentina, so yeah.
Something tells me he's been there. I know I have read that he has traveled extensively in South America, and I've always wished that he would introduce, you know, a Rick Steves South America with all new guides, not just updating these Europe guides, but all new guides from the man himself. But, you know, a boy can dream, and if I only get one ask of Rick Steves, it's not going to be for the South American. It's going to be not for the South American guidebooks. It's going to be that he join us for a 10-part series of interviews.
I at least 10 parts. I did want to say that a couple other things stand out for me on this list. One of them that really pops out is Cleveland. It's interesting, you know, it's great. I think it's great to have some, you know, American cities that don't get as much attention on the list. And, you know, I've been to Cleveland, you know, I haven't even counted the times, but several times at least. And, you know, I haven't really done a lot of like Cleveland exploring, but, you know, this, you know, right up on Cleveland and the really interesting program they have to help folks who have been formerly incarcerated to get into fine dining. It reminds me of that the place I ate at in Wales that was called The Clink, which was a very similar idea. This place is called Edwin's Leadership and Restaurant Institute, and it's it's a place that hires folks who were former inmates, helps them find a place to live, helps them get a driver's license, helps them get their health care, and helps them train and work at a fine dining restaurant. Seems like a very, very cool experiment happening there in Cleveland.
Absolutely. And of course, I personally have never been to Cleveland. It's very much on my radar, and it feels like a place that, is reasonable to travel even in times of COVID. And they've got a James Garfield monument there that I've long had my eye on. So
and
maybe I go put in some dollars and feed up, trying to help people adjusting back to civilian life out of prisons, and then I all stuffed and a little tipsy, I can go check out the James Garfield monument.
And Mark Twain, or it might have been Tennessee Williams, the internet is unclear on this, says that America has only 3 great cities: New York, San Francisco, and New Orleans. Everywhere else is Cleveland. So, what a chance to visit everywhere else in one city.
Absolutely.
What on the list really popped out for you, Kieran?
Well, you gave kind of 2 answers.
There's 52 choices, so it's I have more than 2. I could keep there's so many places on this list that I now want to go to.
Yeah, absolutely. So I too am gonna give an A answer and a B answer, which I wasn't prepared for, but I was torn between these two, so I'll shout it out. And there are different kind of categories of coverage, which is always what I'm excited about. So the first is the place that the Times has now put on my travel radar, and it's not a place that I was very familiar with tourist travel there, is the country of Sierra Leone. And this is a West African country that's along the western coast, so it's not horribly far to get to from the United States, and it's apparently it had a history of tourism, primarily European tourism, but then civil war and then the Ebola outbreak during the Obama administration really took the tourist economy off the map. But they've had over 20 years of peace now, and the Ebola is under control. And so there is a burgeoning eco-friendly tourism economy that's coming back. And particularly interesting is an eco-lodge that they call out, Takugama Chimpanzee Sanctuary, where your stay supports the conservation work for chimpanzees. I mean, who doesn't want to travel to go see chimpanzees?
Yeah, no, I would love to see a chimpanzee in the wild. That would be awesome.
And so it sounds like there's great nature, there's great beaches, and then there's a lot of history. So the Times also mentions that you can visit the ruins of a slave fort and learn a lot more about that history. So Sierra Leone just sounds like it really has it all. It's got history, and it's got adventure, it's got wildlife and nature. I'm enamored with the whole idea of it. So I'm going to be doing a lot more reading on that.
Yeah, that seems like quite an epic adventure.
And actually, one other thing we should call out that the Times does a great job of is most of the listings have a series of hyperlinks out so that you can go a layer deeper if you're really looking to plan a trip. And so I've clicked through to a number of these on the Sierra Leone, and it does just get more and more enticing.
And what was your B answer? Because that's a pretty strong pick.
So my B answer is closer to your Cleveland example.
You can come to Queens anytime you want. You just let me know.
No, but come on. You and I both already knew that Queens had a lot to offer, and particularly in the way of exciting foods. It is the most diverse borough in New York City, easily the most diverse place in the United States.
Yeah, I think famously it has the most languages spoken per square mile of any place in the United States.
Yeah, so I was thrilled to see it on the list, but I do have to think that if you were the Times reporter, that's like, okay, you go to Sierra Leone.
And you take the 7 all the way to Flushing.
Yeah, exactly. The closer to home one that inspired me, which Amy and I spoke about briefly, was Humboldt, Kansas. And just in case folks don't know how that's spelled, Humboldt, Humboldt, Kansas. And this is a town that a bunch of Kansas born and bred folks got together and said, how can we make this a destination town? And so it's reachable from Kansas City easily. It has a population of fewer than 2,000, but they have really invested in creating art spaces, a cool hotel, a great bar, a great bookstore, art galleries. So you just have a great little vacation spot, certainly for a long weekend. And I thought the hook of it that the Times wrote was they call it the Marfa in the Midwest. And, for anyone that's familiar with Marfa, Texas, that's a really compelling promise. So never heard of Humboldt, Kansas personally. And so I'm excited to check this one out whenever I get Midwest way.
And that looks to be about 2 hours outside of Kansas City, which is in itself a really fun place to visit and has ridiculous barbecue, which is one of my favorite reasons to go anywhere in the States.
And if I'm not mistaken, your partner would actually approve of this trip.
Yeah, no, they call out in the in the article here that there's a 60-mile bike trail that goes sort of all around some of the parks in Humboldt, and he would definitely be into that. So that's what stuck out to me when I read that.
Fantastic. Well, again, the 52 places has delivered, and now what do we look forward to? You got Thanksgiving, Christmas, New Year, and 52 places. It's over. I mean, now I just go to sleep until Thanksgiving.
We've got a lot of traveling to do between now and Thanksgiving, Kieran.
You're right about that.
What are we talking about on the next episode, Kieran?
So, Ryan, I'm going to be speaking to Caroline Can, who recently put out an article on Bloomberg all about the new national park system that's being introduced across China. And it's got 5 kind of new landmark national parks that they're establishing. And it has the potential to be just a humongous conservation effort. And so I'm really interested to learn about the different environments, the different wildlife that they're looking to protect. And just to give you a sense of the scale of how important this could be, one of those 5 parks is the size of Florida.
Wow. That is
so
epic.
It'll be really interesting to dive into that and to learn more kind of bucket list the places to add for your next trip to China.
Well, that sounds incredibly interesting, Kieran. And just to have a country where you can, that is so large that you can literally have a national park that is the size of Florida. I mean, that's really something.
Yeah, absolutely. So that'll be where we are next time.
Well, until then, I'm Ryan Davis.
And I'm Kieran Schmidt.
And this is Out of Office, a travel podcast.
Is he taken?
I hope Staten Island makes it next year.
Fingers crossed. I mean, if Pete Davidson can do one thing, it's to get Staten Island on the list next year.
I don't think they're going to keep that boat in Staten Island. That's going to be on this side of the river.
Oh yeah, please. If they want anyone to go, you can't put it on Staten Island.